Hello, I'm Donna Williams, and this is a video about attachment and autism. The term attachment usually conjures up images of psychotherapists and the whole refrigerator mother theory, bad mothers, autism, Bettelheim, etc. Whilst attachment disorders are commonly associated with inconsistent carers, with children who have been abused or neglected, children who have missed forming emotional attachments with an ongoing parent that they can relate to, that is not necessarily the only road to why a person can develop an attachment disorder. If you think about it more broadly, the things that help us to develop attachment include the ability to hold onto a simultaneous sense of self and other. So if you're, when people are little babies, they are resonating with the parent's behavior. They are picking it up and they're getting into this exchange of sounds and movements that not only encourage the child to feel that they're in sync with the carer, it encourages the carer to feel they are in sync with that child, that they have this rapport and this bonding process in place. Now, if you were a deaf-blind child, you might struggle to get this because the sounds that your parent is making, you're not able to hear. The movements that your parent is making, you're not able to see. You still have that physical channel through which to make those connections, the kinesthetic channel to do all that bonding thing, but you're missing some of those other avenues. And so similarly, if you're a person with autism and you have a significant auditory processing disorder or a significant language processing disorder, perhaps you might have had an early history of chronic ear infections. You might come from a background of immune deficiency that set you up for constant ear infections, or you just may have inherited verbal agnosias, meaning deafness. Well, it's going to be a very similar situation to the deaf child, except you're going to be able to hear sound that you can't make sense of, sound that you can't easily categorize, sound that you can't easily distinguish the relevant from the irrelevant. You may find a person's voice, therefore, not something that is distinctly human and connecting. It may just be perceived as a general part of various chaotic noise that's around you. You may tune into it as a series of patterns, but you may be relatively indiscriminate as to whether those patterns are coming from a machine noise or whether they're coming from a human being. So one of those forms of bonding with the person's language patterns and their particular voice may not happen. If you are somebody who is face blind, and this can be, again, genetically inherited as a form of agnosia, prosopagnosia. It can also be caused by brain injury. So some people with brain injury will experience meaning deafness, verbal agnosias, auditory agnosia. They might develop things like face blindness and be unable to distinguish their own mother. I remember my mother being in the supermarket, and I would grab hold of anybody who was wearing the same colour, because I couldn't recognize her as soon as someone with another same color walked past. So what I did was that I became really attached to the green cordial. I felt very like she got used to. She could find me where the cordial was. She could find me where the books were. She could find me where the eucalyptus oil was, and so I guess I became attached to the places that were familiar to me, because faces were not. The places didn't change, the faces did. So just changing their hair, changing their clothing. In the early days of severe face blindness, that meant you had disappeared. So again, what's the feeling that the parent then gets back about their connection with you? They get this feedback that they're irrelevant and you seem not to care who you go off with. So how does that affect the relationship between the mother and the child? And if you're meaning deaf and you're face blind, then you're someone who doesn't particularly respond to your parents' voice. Maybe you don't even particularly respond to your name. If you're face blind on top of that, then you don't respond to the visual presentation of that person. They've walked in a room and you might stare blankly because you're not quite sure who they are yet until they've started having enough of the movements and the sounds that you're used to associating with them. That's if you're not affected by that's if you do tune into a voice. And some face blind people will come to tune into movement and voice, but the visual just won't gel. And even as an adult, my husband would come home and I would open the door and I would be blank and I would walk off because he just appeared to be a stranger. Even when I would go, okay, so I know it must be him because it's such and such time and he's at the door and he's the guy with the hair and the glasses, my brain didn't fully twig. But once he started talking and moving, I could warm up and go, oh yeah, great, he's home. But in the early days, of course, the face blindness, I couldn't even recognize my own face. I didn't understand that the reflection was me until I was in my 20s. And face blindness affects up to 30% of people with autism, or is believed to from very recent surveys of adults on the autism spectrum. So let's look at another form of attachment. We become attached to people because we can read facial expression, body language and intonation. Or can we? So very commonly in people with Asperger's is something called social emotional agnosia, the inability to read facial expression, body language and intonation. So if you can't read it, where is the shared language that builds this connection, this reaching out for more stuff about how we affect each other, if you can't actually perceive it? So you may get somebody who is failing to give that feedback about connection. And it's not just about that the child isn't perceiving your stuff. I mean, they see your face moving, they see your body moving, they hear your voice doing sing-songy stuff unless they have atonia, and there are people who can't hear intonation. They can't actually process intonation. But if they can, well, the person who has social emotional agnosia will be seeing the movements and hearing the sounds, but they won't mean anything. It's a kind of meaning deafness, meaning blindness, but it's associated with the social, emotional messages. Now think of it from the parent's perspective, because bonding is a two-way street. You know, it's like a cycle thing. The parent connects with the child and then gets reinforced in that connection by the child connecting with the parent. If you have sensory perceptual disorders that are severing those connections, what you have is a parent who feels perhaps unnerved, unconfident about their parenting because their child is not seeming to care or pick up those messages. Somehow all the stuff that they feel so valuable to convey isn't gelling. And that can contribute to a lack of connection between the child and the carer without it meaning that the carer has caused this. So I think it's important that we get rid of the taboo about attachment disorders in a context of autism and feel that we can actually talk about it, that there are more than one road that leads to Rome, that just because for a non-autistic child you'd be talking about things like inconsistent carers, you'd be talking about things like neglect and abuse leading to attachment disorders, and someone with autism, the causes may be quite different, but the result may be quite comparable. So another type of issue that can affect attachment in people with autism is the inability to process that simultaneous sense of self and other. So if they get a sense of self and then can't simultaneously track other, they'll be off in their own world. They're bonding with themselves. And then they might process other, but they might go blank because they're only able to process other without the simultaneous context of self. And so for the parent who's watching this, they see the person being at and being in front of, but they don't see this stuff that is being socially with. And I remember when I was in my 30s and I first was able to hold on to a simultaneous sense of self and other for more than 30 minutes. And I was so excited, and I said to Bernard Rimland, I have touched the heaven of shared social. I know what it is to be with. And if you think about that statement, think about that in a context of bonding. How do you bond as a child when you can't hold a simultaneous sense of self and other? Now, another one of the things that will form as bonding between people is not being distressed by them. And if you have difficulty processing the visual as a whole, if you see the part and lose the whole, which is called simultagnosia, what you might be seeing is you're watching somebody's eyebrow but losing their eye. You're getting their teeth and losing their mouth. You're getting their nostrils, losing their nose. You're getting the nose, losing the face. You're getting the fingers, losing the hand or the arm. You're getting the arm, you're losing track of the body. You're getting the head, and then you're losing track of the body. You're getting the clothes, and you've lost the body. You're getting the door, and you've lost the person. So simultagnosia means that you are a person who's constantly distracted and drawn to connecting to parts of people, connecting to their bag, connecting to their clothes, connecting to their jewelry, especially if you're face blind. And one of the causes of face blindness can be simultagnosia, because you just can't see a face as a whole. So how can you build up who is who and hold on to any mental image of a person's face or even your own? So if you have simultagnosia, one of the ways this can affect attachment is, imagine someone coming at you to pick you up, and here's their hands, and you've got, here's their fingers. Next thing, you're swamped with this touch, which you don't expect. Add to that you might get all self, no other, all other, no self, and they're essentially switching you off from your body as you're processing other, with all these wild bits of them that are coming at you. You might have a sensory integration disorder, so as they're making noises and sounds that are meant to connect with you, you can't actually combine all that information, so you're switching between the physical and the auditory and the visual and the physical and the sense of other and lost self, and now here's self and lost other. And that's a very good reason to start either freezing, diverting, or retaliating. And we're talking there about exposure anxiety. We're talking about involuntary self-protection responses, which, if a person develops these before the age of 3, you're becoming neurologically patterned. Your brain is getting used to getting better and better and faster at avoidance, diversion, retaliation. Avoidance, diversion, retaliation. Just like if you were a child playing video games at age 3, by the time you're 10, you are ultra quick at this. Well, with exposure anxiety, if you're ultra trained in having these really hair trigger self-protection responses, by the time you're older, they're out of control. You want to do things voluntarily, but what happens is you avoid your own initiations, you divert from what you want to do, you retaliate and refuse the very thing that you intend to do. And so this is very similar to processes that you'll see in reactive attachment disorder. But I hope that what I've demonstrated is that there's some very good information processing reasons why a person might develop those kind of issues that are very hard to undo. Oppositional defiance disorder. It's not exposure anxiety, but it presents in a similar fashion. So it's much more like the retaliation responses of exposure anxiety. The sort of make me stuff. Similarly, ADHD can present as chronic diversion responses, which you would see in a person with exposure anxiety. Avoidant personality disorder can present as the sort of chronic avoidance responses that you'll see in someone with exposure anxiety. The difference is the person with exposure anxiety tends to manifest all three. And otherwise, if you can have people who develop only sections of that. But how do you bond with somebody who is constantly diverting, unable to focus, unable to have shared attention? Again, the feedback that you get as a carer is that you're incompetent, that the person is disinterested, that you're not connecting, that it's hard work, that you have to keep motivating yourself, you have to keep pushing your emotions down and not taking this stuff personally. If you are a person living with somebody who's got avoidant personality disorder and they're constantly in that, shut down thing, and you're doing all the hard work, it's hard to feel that the relationship is flowing as easily. And if something is hard work and you're always in the role of motivator and carer, where do you get that sort of ability to just relax, let your hair down and say, wow, that was a great connection, we really connected? So you can readjust your expectations, but it's certainly not as easy as with somebody who doesn't have that issue. If you have oppositional defiance disorder, then as a carer, the message you're getting is, why does everything have to be a battle? Why do you constantly have to fight me? And how do you bond with somebody who's always fighting you? So when we look at attachment disorder, we commonly get the heckles up and, oh, it's an accusation. Oh, you're saying I'm a refrigerator mother. Oh, you're harking back to the old days of autism and bad parents. Not necessarily. Maybe there's a place to actually look at how a child's autism has an impact on the confidence of a parent, and it's natural to make a lot of misinterpretations about sensory perceptual problems, about personality stuff, and that the parent will take quite personally, even if they don't want to, even if they put all their efforts into not taking it personally. And whilst they will still connect, and they'll find another way of connecting with that person with autism, which is the really important message, that even when attachment is blocked, you can still find a way to rework it, to recreate it, to redefine attachment and connection. So I think that's the important thing. And so let's run through some of those ways of reconnecting. If you have somebody who is face blind, well, just like a blind person, they're not going to connect on the visual. They're going to connect with smell. They're going to connect with touch. They might connect with your voice, the sound of your voice. They might connect through your objects, so the objects remain more consistent. So there is a basis for forming that attachment. The only problem becomes where you expect it to be directly from the face. Or for the face to mean something. The problem becomes when you take that personally and it affects your attachment with the child. So it's not just about the child's attachment with you, it's about your attachment back with the child as well. So it's a cycle. It's not this sort of cut and dried, this child has this attachment disorder and now I'm the parent tolerating that they have an attachment disorder. It's not that sort of tight, rigid situation. It's quite a cycle, and it's a cycle that you can, that if someone has an attachment disorder, that you can make it much more healthy. So let's take a look at again with face blind kids. They might be very connected to the mirror. A lot of face blind kids are fascinated by the mirror, and they'll stare through their face and they'll be very fascinated by how this person knows all their movements. Instead of constantly saying, that's you, that's you, that's you, when they can't perceive that, which is really very alienating. It's sort of like getting the blind person and saying, look at the pictures, go on, look at the pictures. Well, if they can't see the pictures, then how's that going to help you guys connect? So maybe one of the things to do is you get in front of the mirror yourself and you explore your face and you appear to be quite excited about that, and you do your whispering at your face and you have your little giggles, and they will look and think, I can relate to that. They're having a similar experience to me. So it's that can't beat 'em, join 'em kind of thing, where you are getting a shared language, you're getting a shared reality, even if you're not autistic. if you have somebody who sees the part and loses the whole, so they're always interested in objects or small pieces of things, or fixated on your eyebrow or whatever, and you want them to see you, number one, stop calling that the autism. Stop wishing and waiting and wanting for that to disappear, because simultagnosia may be with them for the rest of their life. I mean, there are ways that you can help glue vision together for people with simultagnosia, and I have a video which is called Battling with Books that looks at tinted lenses as a way of cutting out an amount of incoming information. It leaves the brain more time to process what's left more cohesively. So certainly changing lighting conditions. So for me, I will see visually more cohesively when there's less light, and that's the reason I have tinted lenses as well. So one of the bonding exercises you can do with someone who has that type of issue is you can play with cellophane, coloured cello, and you've got the blue and you've got the red, and you're looking at a red world and a blue world. You can make cardboard boxes and put coloured windows in them, get inside of the big washing machine box, refrigerator box, and look at the world through these different colours. You can get things that are made of coloured plastic and then look around at the world through those. You can get very cheap coloured sunglasses from the $2 shops and explore and play with these, not as a therapist fixating on a person who has a problem, but as somebody who is sharing a sensory perceptual reality and helping this person to know they are not a freak, they're not in another world, they are not unrelatable. You've worked out what's going on with them, and you know how to help them look across at somebody else who is behaving as if they have some awareness of that reality, that they have a shared experience with it. People who have simultagnosia are very good at relating through objects. Doesn't matter if they're not getting the visual meaning from it. If they've got a toy and they're playing with the wheel rather than the car, or they're bending the toy's legs and they're not perceiving the whole toy. You're still having a shared experience of the movement, the textures, and one of the things that may help them to perceive these things as more whole is when you move the small object further away, it's more visually cohesive. So I will try and find an object right now. Let me see. Okay, so here's one. This is it's a compass. Okay, so and it's interesting because I have difficulty recognizing what things are because I have to be touching them, and then when I've got the feel of them in my hands and the movement, I can remember what they are. So there's a relationship, if you like, between meaning blindness and agnosia related issues. But when it's up close, it's much more difficult for me to get to grips with it visually as a whole. And yet when it's far away, I can quickly perceive all of its parts within the sort of combined whole of it. And so by doing stuff that's near and far, taking objects, putting them across the room to perceive them, going, getting them, swapping them over. So exploring their world as though you understand their world. If you're bonding with somebody who has meaning deafness issues, then you can play with sound. You can get your, the inside of the carpet rolls with the tubes and make, play with the slowness of sound, but the quickness of sound. You can play with the way that you can make things louder and softer, play with modulation. You can play with way, play with the patterns of sounds. It doesn't have to all be about work, therapy. Why not play with sounds? Singing, drumming together, these are playing with sounds. Why are we so afraid to get away from just the constant expectation? Because being able to join someone in their own world through play is a fabulous thing, and it reassures that person that they haven't arrived on the wrong planet. they are understood. There are adults who can guide them through this world, who understand what's going on with their sensory stuff. And those adults are willing to work from that reality as part of a social activity. If you have people who don't have speech, or haven't been able to use speech with meaning, again, it's one of those things that creates a world apart and doesn't have to. So find activities that don't rely on you constantly talking for the person, or everything revolving around talking. Rough and tumble, silliness, surrealism, arts are some of those areas. Working together in typed communication and pointing. But again, if we're talking about bonding, how do you bond with someone when you can't connect with speech and you watch them as being a master of the world of speech, and they are not finding ways to join you in your non-verbal world or your type speak world because they're still waiting for you to be a speaking person? Well, if that was somebody who was blind, would you be waiting for them to become sighted? So if it's someone who has speech aphasia, or someone who has grown up meaning deaf and hasn't yet developed functional speech, are you going to act as if they don't exist until they suddenly miraculously don't have that problem anymore? So whilst you may think, oh no, I'm happy to talk for them, I'm happy to help them at all possible times, they're so helpless, they're so low functioning, and I'm so special and important. Don't forget the bonding part. Actually come into their world, then functionally non-verbal world, and find how you're going to connect on that level. And so bonding is a really important part of emotional language. You can't just say, oh, well, this person's autistic, so it's not relevant. It's very relevant. If this is a person who has social emotional agnosia, they can't read facial expression, body language, intonation. So instead of trying to bond with them through all that non-verbal stuff, maybe it's time to bond with them through things like the rough and tumble, the movement things, the billy cart, joining through objects, being in a shared activity that you're doing alongside of each other that does not involve having to read each other's facial expression, body language, intonation. Because if they don't feel like an alien, if they feel understood, if they feel not just understood by a therapist or someone watching from the outside, but they feel understood by someone who has issues the same as them, the same kind of system, they'll feel like a normal human being. They won't feel they have pathologies. And this is a great basis for them letting that stuff take care of itself and getting on with developing as a person and investing in their personhood. And that's what you're doing when you meet them on their own wavelengths. You are recognizing their personhood. You're getting past the condition, getting past your role as a carer or therapist or whatever. You're meeting them as a person to person, and that's what bonding really is about. If somebody has significant difficulty with touch, maybe they're very hypersensitive to touch, maybe they can't simultaneously process touch and visual and the auditory, then one of the ways that you can connect with them is to just calmly be in their company, be physically in their presence, and have touch be much more low-key, much more incidental, much less direct and socially invasive, much less visually full-on. You can also do touch without blah, blah, blah. You can do touch without constant drawing attention. Look at this, la, 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 do you like that? So think about how you're going to make your interaction less cluttered so that the person is less overwhelmed and therefore is less likely to be triggered into the involuntary avoidance, diversion, retaliation patterns of exposure anxiety. Is your style palatable? We're not all like dogs, wagtail, eager, lap it up, more, praise, attention, recognition. We're not all like that. Some of us are cats, naturally like cats, and if we have information processing problems, we're more likely to take things in small doses, to be quite reticent. This thing of, if I am free to leave, therefore I can stay. And so people who are more cat people, they're going to need an approach that is less directly confrontational. So you might find that by just being quietly in their company, being with them in parallel instead of constantly working on them, fixating, trying to force out every little piece of response that you can get until they've attacked themselves, that's actually not going to be conducive to them discovering why they want to be alive, why they want to pursue information, why they want to get more interaction. So sometimes less is more. And with exposure anxiety, it's all about playing hard to get, keeping things small doses, always leaves the person wanting more. And if there's an indirectly confrontational way of doing things, then you do that. You become self-owning. You stop being the invader. And just by breathing and getting into that rhythm, you will have the ability to discover just how in company we really can be when we're in the company of ourselves. And that can be a really bonding space. Bonding is not all about how can I invade you, how can I take from you, how can I engulf you, how can I entangle with you, how can I own you, how can I show you off, how can I be proud of you. That's not necessarily a bonding thing. For some people, they'll thrive on that. They'll say, oh, that person's so proud of me. Oh, I reflect really well on them and it makes me feel really great. No, and not for all people. We're not all like that. And some people are really so irked by that it causes them a whole lot of defense mechanisms, including becoming more schizoid and cutting off from the constant gush, fuss, intimacy, entanglement thing. So don't believe that that's, that if someone's defending against that's all the autism and it needs to be crushed and it needs to be defeated, because maybe that's actually a really wonderful message to you about how you could become more self-owning, more in your own space. Do a bit more breathing with life and expectation, and find that connection in the quietness by being in parallel with somebody. And that's actually a real gift that they're offering you that you may not be noticing. So when we're talking about bonding, it's also about compatibility. It's about finding how you're going to adapt to this particular personality. And so people with autism commonly have quite solitary traits. Not all of them. And it's often harder for some people to connect with and bond with people who are naturally self-protective, fairly self-owning, quite little self-entertainment machines, self-parenting machines, little autonomy machines, who just don't have a use for these frivolous social invaders. But even a solitary person can deeply appreciate, usually, being in the company of somebody else who's behaving as if they also really enjoy being in their own company. And there's nothing, I guess, more lovely for me as two people who are very good at their own company, who can just sit quietly being. That everything doesn't have to be about doing. It can be about being. And sometimes just even being in a room and being comfortable quietly breathing is actually still an activity. So I hope that's given people things to think about, and why some people with autism may develop attachment disorders, why they may develop reactive attachment and appear to be quite defensive against intimacy and connection, why they may have a range of diversion responses that appear quite confusing in terms of attachment, that may look like very disorganized attachment patterns, why some people with autism may appear to be quite indiscriminate, uninhibited in their attachments, and basically walk off with anyone, talk to anyone, not really connect with any specific face or voice or person. And I think it's not necessarily for the same reasons that it would happen in a non-autistic person. At the same time, it's really important to keep in mind that just because someone with autism does have additional attachment issues doesn't mean that it's not partially because of their autism, and partially because they may have also experienced inconsistent carers. They may have also experienced neglect and abuse, and that doesn't mean that they don't also have the information processing issues of autism. In other words, two roads can lead to Rome, and you might actually find that someone can walk both of those roads at the same time and arrive at the same place. So I hope that that's a useful sort of thing to keep in mind, and that doesn't mean that that we need to confuse that with refrigerator mothers or presume that every person will have both of those things going. There's certain types of approaches that work better with attachment than others. So RDI, relationship development intervention, and it's and floor time are some of the approaches that work specifically on the whole bonding process. Option, the whole Sunrise program, again, is another one that's very much about bonding connection. But I hope that in this video I've also given you a lot of ideas that are low cost and no cost, and don't involve buying into expensive autism packages, because this is stuff that you really can get your head around if you want to, and explore for yourself. I have a couple of books that may help. One of these is Exposure Anxiety, The Invisible Cage of Involuntary Self-Protection Responses. Another one is Autism, an Inside-Out Approach, which looks at the different sensory perceptual issues and ways of still connecting with people and making autism-friendly environments. Another one is the Jumble Jigsaw, which looks at different pieces of autism fruit salad, including the sensory perceptual issues, but also has got a section on attachment, but also dependency. And dependency is a way of, I guess, losing yourself in the carer and refusing to be a person, to develop your own personhood, which in a sense is kind of severing that attachment relationship. It's making yourself into a role instead of a person to control the carer. So again, that's worth having a look at. So I hope that you found this useful, and you can find more information at donnawilliams.net. Thank you.